Sophia Bennett stepped into the first-class cabin, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She barely acknowledged the flight attendant, her mind racing with frustration from her day, board meetings, phone calls, pointless dinners. All she wanted now was to relax, sip her champagne, and get through this flight with minimal disruption. Her phone buzzed in her hand, a text from her assistant reminding her of tomorrow's high-stakes pitch to a new client. She sighed, shoving the device into her purse, already dreading the pressure, but then she saw him. Her seatmate was already settled in his seat. A black man casually dressed in jeans and a simple jacket. He had no business sitting in first class, Sophia thought. The discomfort hit her immediately, a rising heat in her chest that she tried to push down but couldn't. Her eyes flicked to the empty seats nearby, but first class was fully booked. The man next to her was flipping through a thick stack of papers, oblivious to her dismay. His calm presence only heightened her agitation. She glanced toward the flight attendant, raising a hand to get her attention. Within seconds, a young blonde attendant appeared at her side, her professional smile faltering as she sensed Sophia's displeasure. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" the attendant asked, her voice laced with hesitation. Sophia folded her arms, her voice low but dripping with annoyance. "I'm supposed to sit next to him." The attendant blinked, confusion crossing her face. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't understand." Sophia huffed in frustration, narrowing her eyes. "I'm not comfortable. Can you move me? I don't—" She paused, choosing her words carefully, though the distaste in her voice was clear. "I don't want to sit here." The attendant's gaze shifted toward Malik, the man next to her, then back to Sophia. A flash of realization crossed her face, and her smile tightened, becoming more strained. "I'm really sorry, Mom, but the flight is completely full. We don't have any available seats to switch." Sophia's expression hardened. "Are you serious? I'd pay $5,000, 0 cents for this seat, and you're telling me I have to sit here next to this man?" "This is absurd," Sophia added, her voice rising slightly. "I've flown first class with this airline for years, and I've never been forced to deal with this kind of inconvenience." Her eyes darted toward Malik, her words laced with venom, though she kept her tone just low enough to avoid a full scene. The flight attendant's discomfort was palpable. She glanced nervously at Malik, who hadn't even looked up from his papers. His calm demeanor seemed to mock the storm brewing inside Sophia. The attendant's voice dropped to a hushed whisper. "Ma'am, I understand, but I can assure you that all of our first-class passengers are." "Don't lecture me on your policies," Sophia snapped, cutting her off. "I'm a paying customer, and I have a right to sit in comfort. This is unacceptable." The attendant's face flushed as she tried to maintain her composure. "I truly apologize, but there's nothing I can do. The flight is full. If you like, I can offer you a complimentary drink." "A drink?" Sophia scoffed. "You think that'll fix this?" "You even understand the kind of day I've had?" Sophia continued, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "I'm on my way to a critical meeting, and now I'm stuck here dealing with this? I deserve better than this." The passengers nearby were starting to glance over, sensing the tension in the air. Sophia's cheeks burned, but she couldn't back down now. She couldn't understand how this man, this random man, was sitting in first class as if he belonged there. And, worse, how he could sit so calmly while she was fuming beside him. Sophia's voice rose slightly, her frustration boiling over. "Do you even know how much I pay for this seat?" The flight attendant's eyes flicked nervously toward Malik again, clearly uncomfortable with the scene. "Ma'am, I assure you that Monsieur Carter—" Sophia's head snapped toward her. "Carter?" she repeated, her voice laced with disdain. "Who is he exactly?" Before the attendant could respond, Malik finally looked up. He gave a small, polite smile, his eyes steady and calm as they met Sophia's. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice deep but measured. Sophia froze momentarily, caught off guard by his directness. Her mouth opened, then closed, her indignation bubbling to the surface. "I just don't see why I have to sit next to someone like you." Malik finished her sentence for her, his tone still calm but his eyes sharp, like me. Her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "That's not what I said. You didn't have to." His words were simple, but the weight behind them was heavy. "But let's be clear," Malik added, his voice steady but now carrying a subtle edge. "You don't know me, and I don't know you. Yet you've already decided who I am. Why is that?" Sophia's breath caught, her face burning hotter. She wasn't used to being called out so directly, and certainly not by someone she'd already dismissed. "I'm not here to argue," she snapped, though her voice wavered. "I just want to be comfortable on this flight." The flight attendant stood frozen, unsure of how to proceed. Malik turned back to her, his expression softening slightly. "It's all right," he said gently. "There's no need to make a scene. I'm sure we can all get through this flight in peace." Sophia's hands clenched into fists. She couldn't believe the audacity. He was acting as if she were the one causing trouble, as if he were the reasonable one. "I'm not causing a scene," she hissed, though the quiver in her voice betrayed her. "I just don't want to sit here." "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Malik said quietly, his eyes locking onto hers again. "This is a long flight. We can either sit here in silence, or you can keep pushing this and make it worse for both of us. Your choice." Malik didn't respond further, turning his attention back to his papers as if the conversation was over. Sophia seethed, the humiliation settling over her like a heavy blanket. The attendant, still unsure of how to proceed, gave a stiff nod and backed away, leaving Sophia standing there, fuming. She sat down, her movements stiff and mechanical. The flight hadn't even begun, and already she felt trapped. Not by the seat, but by her own anger and the man next to her who refused to give her the reaction she wanted. Malik didn't say another word, but Sophia's mind raced, replaying the interaction over and over, her face burning with shame each time. She muttered under her breath, just loud enough for him to hear, "This is ridiculous. I shouldn't have to deal with this." She had never been put in such a position before, never been made to feel so small. The plane began to taxi, and as the engines roared to life, Sophia felt the weight of her words and actions pressing down on her. But the worst part was knowing that Malik had remained unflustered, unmoved, while she had been reduced to a state of childish fury. The humiliation of it all gnawed at her, and the flight had only just begun. She couldn't stand it. As the plane lifted off the runway at 7:30 p.m. on October 15, 2024, Sophia's tension only deepened. She couldn't stop glancing sideways at Malik, who seemed completely unaffected by the situation. He was engrossed in his papers again, flipping through them with a calm detachment that infuriated her even more. She leaned toward him slightly, unable to hold back. "You're really just going to sit there and act like nothing happened?" Malik didn't look up immediately, but when he did, his expression was unreadable. "What do you want from me, exactly?" he asked, his tone even. "You've made your feelings clear. I'm not going to fight you over it." "I'm not asking for a fight," Sophia shot back, her voice sharp, "but you could at least acknowledge how unfair this is. I paid for this seat, and now I'm stuck here, dealing with this." Malik raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Unfair? You're in first class, same as me. Seems fair enough." Sophia's jaw tightened, her frustration mounting. "You know what I mean," she said, her voice low but pointed. "This isn't what I signed up for." Alex sighed, setting his papers down for a moment. "You're right. You didn't sign up to sit next to someone you don't like, but neither did I, yet here we are." Sophia, a 42-year-old marketing executive, felt trapped, her irritation bubbling just below the surface. She clenched her fists in her lap, trying to push down the discomfort, but every time Malik shifted slightly in his seat or let out a quiet breath, it was like a personal offense. The flight attendants moved up and down the aisle, serving drinks and adjusting trays. Sophia caught the eye of the same blonde attendant who had tried to calm her earlier. The woman looked nervous, but Sophia was in no mood to let it go. She flagged her down again, her tone clipped. "Can I please speak to the supervisor on this flight?" The attendant hesitated, her eyes darting toward Malik before she answered. "Ma'am, I'm the lead attendant today. How can I help you?" "I don't think you understand the situation," Sophia said through gritted teeth. "I've asked to be moved multiple times, and I'm still here, sitting next to him." "This is beyond unacceptable," Sophia added, her voice rising again. "I've got a major presentation tomorrow, and I need to be focused, not dealing with this nonsense. Do your job and fix this." The attendant's face flushed, but she kept her voice steady. "As I mentioned before, Mom, the flight is fully booked. We really don't have any other seats available." Sophia's frustration boiled over. "I can't believe I'm being treated this way. Do you have any idea who I am? I have been a loyal customer of this airline for years, and this is the service I get?" Malik remained silent beside her, though Sophia swore she saw the slightest twitch at the corner of his mouth, as if he were holding back a smirk. It made her blood boil. The attendant gave a tight-lipped smile. "I'm very sorry, Mom. We appreciate your loyalty, but there really isn't anything more I can do. I'll be happy to bring you a drink or anything else you need to make the flight more comfortable." Sophia scoffed, waving her off with an irritated hand. "A drink isn't going to fix this." She turned to face the window, her chest heaving with indignation. The attendant, sensing there was nothing more to be done, offered a small nod and retreated down the aisle. The silence between Sophia and Malik was deafening. She could feel the judgment from the other passengers, though no one said a word. They all knew. They had all heard her complaints, her demands, her thinly veiled insults. But Malik, he acted as if none of it had touched him. He didn't argue, didn't fight back. He just sat there, calm, collected, and utterly indifferent to the turmoil boiling inside her. She muttered again, louder this time, "This is why I hate flying commercial. You never know who you'll end up next to." Malik glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable, before returning to his papers. The dismissal only fueled her anger further. She couldn't understand it. She had expected anger, a reaction, something that would justify her own feelings. But instead, his silence left her feeling small, exposed. It was as if her words had bounced off him, leaving her alone to stew in the mess she had created. She glanced at him again, watching as he calmly folded his papers and placed them neatly into a leather folder. His movements were precise, controlled, like everything he did was part of a well-rehearsed routine. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. "You think this is funny?" she hissed, her voice low but sharp. Malik slowly turned his head, his gaze meeting hers with that same impenetrable calm. "I'm sorry, this?" He gestured between them, his tone even. Sophia's face flushed. "You know exactly what I mean. I've been asking to be moved since I got on this plane and you haven't said a word. Not one word." Malik sighed softly, his expression still unreadable. "And what would you like me to say?" Sophia was momentarily speechless. She hadn't expected the question. "I don't know," she muttered, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks again. "Something, anything. You're just sitting there, pretending like none of this bothers you." Malik leaned back in his seat, folding his hands calmly in his lap. "I don't have anything to prove," he said simply. "Your discomfort isn't my responsibility." "And that's easy for you to say," Sophia snapped, her voice trembling with frustration. "You're not the one who's been disrespected here. I paid for a certain experience, and this isn't it." Malik's eyes narrowed slightly, though his tone remained calm. "Disrespected? You've been talking about me like I'm not even here. If anyone's been disrespected, it's not you." Sophia froze, her heart pounding. His words hit harder than she expected, and for a moment she couldn't find a response. That's not what I meant," she stammered, but the words felt weak, hollow. Malik shook his head slightly, his voice steady but firm. "You meant exactly what you said, and that's fine, but don't expect me to play along with your narrative." Sophia blinked, her mind racing to process his words. There was something so infuriating about how composed he was. She had expected anger, outrage even, but instead he offered nothing but calm indifference. It made her feel even worse, like her complaints were nothing more than the petulant whining of a spoiled child. "You don't think I'm justified in wanting to be moved?" she pressed, her voice wavering between frustration and defensiveness. Malik held her gaze for a long moment before answering. "I think you're justified in feeling whatever you feel, but that doesn't mean I have to react to it." The simplicity of his words hit her like a slap. Sophia felt her pulse quicken, her anger struggling to find footing against his calm reasoning. For the first time she was at a loss for words. What could she say? He wasn't giving her any room to maneuver, no opportunity to shift the blame or make herself the victim. His calm demeanor forced her to confront the ugliness of her own actions, and the realization made her feel sick. She turned back to the window, her mind racing, heart pounding in her chest. The weight of her own prejudice, her own entitlement, pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. For the rest of the flight, Sophia sat in silence, her thoughts churning with shame, confusion, and anger. She had never been forced to confront herself like this before. Never had to question her own sense of superiority, and it terrified her. Beside her, Malik remained calm, his presence a constant reminder of everything she didn't want to admit. As the flight continued, the tension between Sophia and Malik was palpable, though unspoken. The silence between them stretched like a taut wire, vibrating with unaddressed emotions. Sophia tried to distract herself with a movie on her screen, but she couldn't concentrate. Every so often her eyes flicked toward Malik, who sat quietly, his composure unwavering. Hours passed, and the cabin lights dimmed as the flight attendants began preparing for the evening service. Sophia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her frustration simmering just beneath the surface. She hated feeling like this, on edge, embarrassed, and somehow wrong. It wasn't a familiar feeling for her. She was used to being in control, used to having her way, but here, in the small space of a plane, nothing was going according to her plan. A voice crackled over the intercom, interrupting her thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin serving dinner shortly. For our first-class passengers, our chef has prepared a special menu. Please enjoy your meal." Sophia sighed, trying to calm herself. Maybe some food and a glass of wine would help ease her tension. She needed something, anything, to distract her from the uncomfortable knot that had settled in her chest. As the flight attendants moved through the aisle, placing the elegant meal trays in front of each passenger, Sophia caught sight of Malik once more. He was flipping through the papers again, this time with a focused expression, as if he were deep in thought. The attendant placed Sophia's tray in front of her with a polite smile, but Sophia barely acknowledged her. She picked up her fork, prodding at the gourmet meal, though her appetite had long since disappeared. Just as she was about to take a bite, she overheard something. Malik speaking quietly to the flight attendant beside him. The tone of his voice was low but polite, and Sophia couldn't help but listen in. "Could I get a glass of sparkling water, please?" Malik asked, his voice calm and measured as always. "Of course, Mr. Carter," the attendant replied with a respectful nod, moving quickly to fulfill his request. Sophia froze. Mr. Carter. The name echoed in her mind, and for a moment she felt a flicker of confusion. There was something about the way the attendant had spoken to him, something deferential, almost respectful. It wasn't just the name that caught her attention, it was the tone. She watched out of the corner of her eye as Malik continued reading through his papers, unbothered by anything around him. Her thoughts raced. Mr. Carter, why did that name sound so familiar? And why had the attendant spoken to him with such quiet reverence? The answer gnawed at the edges of her mind, but she couldn't quite grasp it. Unable to resist, Sophia leaned slightly toward him, her voice sharp but low. "Why do they keep calling you that, Mr. Carter? Like, you're someone important." Malik glanced at her, his expression neutral. "Maybe because it's my name," he said simply, his tone carrying a hint of amusement that only fueled her irritation. "That's not what I mean," Sophia snapped, her voice trembling with a mix of curiosity and frustration. "They're acting like you're, I don't know, some kind of VIP. What's the deal?" Malik paused, his eyes studying her for a moment before he spoke. "Does it matter? You've already made up your mind about me. Why do you need more information now?" Sophia's cheeks burned, his words cutting deeper than she wanted to admit. "I just think it's strange, that's all," she muttered, turning back to her tray, her hands trembling slightly. "Treating you like you own the place." Malik didn't respond immediately, and when he did, his voice was calm but pointed. "Maybe they're just doing their job. Or maybe you're reading too much into it. Either way, it's not your concern." Sophia clenched her jaw, the dismissal stinging more than she expected. She wanted to push further, to demand answers, but something in his tone told her she wouldn't get anywhere. Instead, she turned her attention back to her meal, though every bite felt like ash in her mouth. An hour passed, the hum of the plane's engines filling the cabin as dinner service concluded. The lights dimmed further, signaling that it was time for the passengers to settle in for the long transatlantic journey. Sophia leaned back in her seat, exhaustion beginning to creep in. Just as her eyelids began to droop, a voice broke through the peaceful lull. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking." Sophia's eyes fluttered open, her head turning slightly toward the intercom. She expected the usual mid-flight update, altitude, weather conditions, estimated arrival time, but there was something different in the captain's voice. This time it was excited, proud even. "I'd like to take this opportunity to extend a special thank you to one of our esteemed passengers this evening," the captain continued, his voice ringing with a sense of occasion. "We're honored to have Mr. Malik Carter, the owner and CEO of this airline, flying with us tonight. Mr. Carter, on behalf of the entire crew and staff, we'd like to express our gratitude for your leadership and vision. It's a privilege to have you on board." Sophia's heart stopped. She sat, frozen in her seat, her brain struggling to process the words she had just heard. Malik Carter, the owner, CEO of the airline. It felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath her, leaving her in a freefall of shock and disbelief. She turned to look at Malik, her mouth slightly open in astonishment. He hadn't reacted much, simply offering a polite nod to the flight attendant who had acknowledged him. There was no smugness in his expression, no gloating, just calm acceptance, as if this was something he dealt with every day, and maybe it was. Sophia's mind reeled. This man, this black man whom she had treated with such disdain, whom she had tried so desperately to avoid, was the owner of the entire airline. She felt a cold wave of humiliation wash over her, followed by a searing heat of embarrassment. How could she have been so wrong, so blind? The memory of her earlier comments, her entitled demands, her outright refusal to sit beside him, all came rushing back, slamming into her like a freight train. She had complained about him, insulted him, all while he sat there, composed, dignified, and silent. He had thought he didn't belong here, but in reality, it was her who didn't belong. Sophia's throat tightened, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she didn't know what to say. She wanted to apologize, to somehow take back everything she had said, but the words stuck in her throat, suffocated by her own shame. Malik turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers for the first time since the captain's announcement. There was no anger in his gaze, no triumph, just quiet understanding. He saw her embarrassment, her shame, and yet he said nothing. You're the CEO? Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible, laced with disbelief. Why didn't you say anything? Malik studied her for a moment, his expression calm but his eyes piercing. Would it have changed how you treated me? He asked, his voice low and steady, or would you have just found another reason to be upset? Sophia's breath hitched, her face flushing with shame. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was right, and she knew it. The realization made her feel even smaller, her earlier arrogance crumbling under the weight of her own actions. In that moment, Sophia wanted to disappear. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her, the judgment radiating from every direction. Her carefully constructed facade of superiority had crumbled, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Malik, meanwhile, simply returned to his papers, his expression calm and unaffected. He didn't need to say anything. His mere presence was enough to remind her of just how wrong she had been. As the plane cruised smoothly through the night, Sophia sat in silence, her mind a whirlwind of regret. She had spent the entire flight judging Malik based on nothing more than the color of his skin and the clothes on his back. And now there was nothing she could do to undo the damage. The hours stretched on, but Sophia's humiliation only deepened. She couldn't stop replaying the captain's announcement in her mind. Malik Carter, the owner and CEO of the airline, the words echoed, a reminder of her ignorance and prejudice. She had insulted a man who not only belonged in first class, but owned the entire plane, the entire company. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the small glass of wine on her tray, hoping the drink might dull the sharp sting of embarrassment. But as she took a sip, her throat felt tight, her thoughts too loud to ignore. Across from her, Malik remained unbothered, his calm presence a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Sophia. She couldn't bring herself to look at him anymore, each glance serving as a brutal reminder of her own behavior. Every quiet moment between them felt like a ticking clock, counting down the seconds of her shame. She considered apologizing, had even rehearsed the words in her mind a dozen times. But every time she opened her mouth, the apology felt hollow, insufficient. What could she possibly say that would make up for what she'd done? How could she explain the assumptions she had made about him, based solely on his appearance? Her throat tightened again, and she set the glass down, unable to finish the drink. The flight attendants were making their rounds, but even their attentive service couldn't soothe the knot in her stomach. She saw them approach Malik, their smiles more genuine, their demeanor softer. They knew who he was, respected him, and why wouldn't they? He wasn't just any passenger, he was the man behind it all. For the first time in a long time, Sophia felt small, not in the way she was used to feeling superior to those around her, but truly insignificant. She had spent years building a life that revolved around status, wealth, and image, and yet none of that had mattered in this moment. Her assumptions, her entitlement, it had all been stripped away by the quiet dignity of the man sitting beside her. As she sat in silence, the flight attendant returned to Malik with another drink. Sophia glanced up, her curiosity betraying her as she overheard their brief exchange. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," the flight attendant said with a smile. "It's always an honor to have you on board." Malik smiled back, polite but reserved. "Thank you for taking care of everyone tonight," he replied, his voice steady and kind. The flight attendant nodded, clearly appreciative of the acknowledgement, before turning to serve the other passengers. Sophia watched the interaction closely, noting how effortlessly Malik carried himself. There was no arrogance, no demand for special treatment. He was simply respectful, aware of the people around him in a way Sophia hadn't been throughout the entire flight. The realization hit her hard. While she had spent the last several hours trying to separate herself from him, he had been nothing but gracious, silent, composed, and worst of all, kind. He hadn't needed to put her in her place. Her own behavior had done that for him. Sophia's thoughts churned, the guilt gnawing at her. She could barely remember the last time she had felt this way, so painfully aware of her own shortcomings. She wasn't used to being wrong. In her world, people rarely challenged her, and she liked it that way. But now, confronted with the quiet reality of her actions, there was no escaping the truth. She needed to apologize. Her heart raced as she sat up straighter in her seat, her mind rehearsing the words she would say. She would explain that she had been stressed, that it had been a long day, that her behavior hadn't reflected her true self. But, as the excuses formed in her mind, they felt thin, weak. No excuse could justify how she had treated him. Taking a deep breath, she turned slightly toward Malik, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a moment she hesitated, the words catching in her throat, but she forced herself to speak, her voice quieter than she intended. "Mr. Carter." Malik looked up from his papers, his expression neutral, though his eyes showed the slightest hint of curiosity. "Yes?" Sophia swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. I wanted to apologize for earlier." Malik didn't respond right away, simply watching her, his face unreadable, as if weighing her words. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable, and for a moment Sophia wondered if he was going to say anything at all. Finally he nodded, his voice calm and steady. "You don't need to apologize." Sophia blinked, caught off guard by his response. She had expected, something else. Maybe anger, maybe a cold dismissal, but not this. Malik continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "I understand that people carry assumptions with them. It's part of life. We all have our prejudices, even if we don't want to admit it." His words hung in the air, and Sophie felt a sharp pang of guilt in her chest. She had expected him to rebuke her, to use her apology as an opportunity to remind her of her mistakes, but instead he was offering her grace, something she hadn't earned. "I appreciate your apology," Malik said after a pause, "but what's more important is that you recognize why you felt the way you did." Sophia's face flushed, shame creeping up her neck. She didn't know how to respond to that. She had spent a whole life justifying her behavior, using her status to push others down. And now, here was a man who had every right to humiliate her, but he wasn't taking it. "It's not about me," Malik continued, his voice soft but firm. "It's about how we see each other. I'm not offended because I've seen this before, many times. It doesn't surprise me. But I hope, for your sake, that this experience changes how you see people in the future." Sophia felt her throat close up, her emotions swelling to the surface. She wasn't used to this, being spoken to with such calm wisdom, especially after how she had behaved. His words cut through her defenses, laying bare the truth she hadn't wanted to face. Malik returned to his papers without another word, leaving Sophia sitting in stunned silence. She had apologized, but the weight of her actions still pressed down on her. There was no undoing what she had done, no erasing the initial snap judgment she had made. But maybe, just maybe, she could learn from it. The rest of the flight passed in a haze of quiet reflection for Sophia. Malik's words echoed in her mind, pulling at her thoughts in ways she hadn't expected. She'd spent years avoiding introspection, hiding behind her wealth, status, and the comfort of never having to question herself. But now, everything felt different. She stole glances at Malik from time to time, still amazed by how calm he remained. There was something about his composure, the way he carried himself with such quiet dignity that both unsettled and fascinated her. He had every reason to be furious with her, to dismiss her apology or make her feel small in return. But he hadn't. Instead, he had offered her a lesson, not through lectures or accusations, but through the simple act of treating her with more respect than she had shown him. As the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, Sophia felt a growing sense of unease. The flight was almost over, but the weight of everything that had happened lingered. She wasn't sure what would happen once they landed, whether she'd have the courage to face Malik again, or if she'd leave without another word. The familiar buzz of the intercom interrupted her thoughts. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into Los Angeles. We'll be landing shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for arrival." Sophia's heart thudded in her chest. She shifted in her seat, the reality of what was about to happen sinking in. The flight was ending, but the feelings that had stirred within her weren't going away. She glanced out the window, the city lights of Los Angeles flickering like tiny stars below them, a reminder of the world she was about to step back into. The wheels touched down with a soft jolt, and the plane began to taxi toward the gate. Around her, passengers began gathering their belongings, the quiet murmur of conversation filling the cabin once more. Sophia remained still, her thoughts racing, unsure of what to do next. Beside her, Malik calmly packed away his papers and closed his briefcase, his movements slow and deliberate as if he had all the time in the world. Sophia felt a rush of nerves as she realized this was her last chance to say something, to end this encounter on her terms. Not just as the woman who had judged him. She turned toward him, her voice hesitant. "Mr. Carter?" Malik paused, glancing up at her with that same calm, steady expression. "Yes?" Sophia swallowed, her mouth suddenly dry. "I just wanted to say, I appreciate what you said earlier, and I've been thinking about it a lot." He didn't respond immediately, simply nodding slightly, encouraging her to continue. "I realize now how wrong I was," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just about you, but about everything. About the way I see people, the way I've treated people, this whole flight. It's made me realize how much I need to change." Malik watched her, his expression softening. "It's not easy to confront those things," he said gently, "but recognizing it is the first step." Sophia nodded, feeling a lump rise in her throat. She had never been this vulnerable in front of anyone before, let alone a man she had disrespected. But something about Malik, his calm strength, his quiet understanding, made her want to be honest, even if it was painful. "I don't know how to fix it," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly, "but I'm going to try." For the first time, Malik's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. "That's all anyone can do." The plane came to a stop at the gate, and the flight attendants began preparing to open the doors. Passengers around them stood up, gathering their bags and belongings, eager to disembark. Sophia remained seated for a moment, watching as Malik stood and reached for his carry-on. She felt an overwhelming need to express her gratitude, to find some way to acknowledge the grace he had shown her. As he stood in the aisle, preparing to leave, Sophia found her voice again. "Thank you," she said, her words soft but sincere. Malik looked at her, and for a brief moment their eyes met in understanding. "Take care, Sophia," he said quietly, before turning to walk down the aisle. Sophia watched him go, her heart heavy but full of a new sense of clarity. She had come onto this flight thinking that she had the world figured out, that her wealth, status, and privilege gave her the right to judge others. But now, as she watched Malik walk away, she realized just how small her world had been. He hadn't needed to humiliate her. He hadn't needed to prove her wrong. His presence alone, his quiet dignity, had been enough to dismantle the walls she had built around herself. As the rest of the passengers filed out of the plane, Sophia remained seated for a few moments longer. She let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settle over her. She had come on this flight as one person, but she was leaving as someone else. Someone who had finally begun to question the things she had always taken for granted. The flight attendants were making their final rounds, gently encouraging the last passengers to disembark. Sophia stood up slowly, gathering her things, her mind still processing the events of the last few hours. As she walked down the aisle, stepping out of the plane and into the bustling terminal, she felt a strange sense of hope. This wasn't the end of her story, it was just the beginning of something new, a journey that would require her to confront her own biases, her own privilege, and to do better. The world outside the terminal was loud, chaotic, and full of distractions, but for once, Sophia felt calm. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face it with the same quiet determination that Malik had shown her. As she stepped into the bright lights of the Los Angeles International Airport, Sophia made a silent promise to herself. She would no longer live her life in a bubble of privilege and judgment. She would work to become the kind of person who didn't just see the surface, but who looked deeper, who understood. And as she walked through the crowded terminal, for the first time in a long time, Sophia felt lighter, free from the weight of her old self and ready to step into the unknown.